Hi,
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So I'm Ivanka. I'm a high school student and I'm really passionate about climate change and sustainability. And so I first got interested in methane emissions specifically when I did my research project at the U of M with the USDA. And then I did a project at Cornell also, and they were both in reducing methane emissions from livestock using feed additives. And so I started this initiative, Methane Matters, to educate people on methane emissions, like their sources and their impacts and some mitigation strategies. And I've been doing these podcasts, and I also wrote this book on methane emissions that goes a lot more into detail than any of my videos on this channel. And I'm really excited to hear all about your work.
Cool. Yeah, that's really impressive that you wrote that book.
Thanks.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, so I'm Melinda. I'm a research scientist at Stanford University. But I'm fairly new to that position. Before that, I've only been in this position for about 2 months. Before that, I was a research scientist with the U.S. Geological Survey for about 4 years. And then yeah, I mean, I can go into like my entire background. I don't know if you want me to go into that now or
Yeah, that was my next question.
okay. Yeah, so the lab I'm working in, I'm working with Dr. Elliot White. He's the main PI, which is the principal investigator. And I just work directly under him, and we just collaborate on a bunch of projects together at Stanford. But how I got into, I guess, the field is just kind of a long winding story.
Okay.
It's not very like linear, I guess. But I did my undergrad at the University of Texas in marine and freshwater biology. That's in Austin, Texas. And I originally started as a math major because I thought that was easier at the time. I was very good at math. And I think after my third year, I switched to marine biology because I didn't even know we had that program at the University of Texas because they do have a campus in Port Aransas, Texas. I'm not sure if you know where that is, but it's on the coast.
Oh, okay.
So Austin is like on the mainland or further inland in Texas, like central Texas. And then they have a campus that's about 4 hours away on the coast where marine biology majors get to go out and take more intense classes focused on marine biology. And so I found out we had that. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to switch to that because that sounds way more fun than being a math person. I mean, I still use a lot of math and stuff, but at the time I just thought that all you could do is, or all I could be is like a math teacher. And that's not, which isn't even true, but you know, at the time I didn't know. And so I switched. And then after I finished, I took a year off. And then in that year, because I had applied to grad school, but I deferred for a year because I needed a break a little bit. And in that year, I kind of did a bunch of different things. I spent about 3 months in Argentina, just hanging out. And then, but I also worked as a marine mammal observer on seismic vessels. And so I'm not sure if you know about seismic vessels and how they work, but they're basically these vessels in the Gulf of Mexico that are basically shooting pressure into the Gulf of Mexico, looking for pockets of oil, basically. And as part of the Marine Mammal Act, they're required to have marine mammal observers. So if there's any marine mammals within like a kilometer of the ship, they have to like stop all operations. So they didn't really like us on the ship. So that was that. And then I eventually started grad school. I did my master's at Texas A&M University in Corpus Christi. And that was mostly in wetlands still. Oh, I didn't even go. So I did research as an undergrad. Sorry, let me go back. I did research in seagrass ecosystems. That was how I got further into research. And I was like, oh, that sounds exciting. And that's why I applied to grad school. But then I was like, let's give it a year. And then when I started my master's, I was mostly focusing on wetland ecosystems in Texas, looking at sedimentation rates. and which didn't sound very exciting to me when I first started, because I was like, I'm literally watching sediment accumulate over time, which is like the slowest process ever, but it is very interesting and very important, especially for a lot of modelers that need the data for projections, like wetland projections. But so I did that, and then I took a few more years off, or 2 years, I think, or about a year and a half or something, because I got a job at a wetland ecology lab at Florida International University.
Okay.
And there I did a lot of field work working in the Everglades, did a lot of sampling. So we collected water samples, vegetation samples, soil samples, and this was part of the long-term ecological research program that they have there. And so as part of the lab, and this is like many labs that are part of this program, and so we just collect a bunch of samples to basically monitor the health of the Everglades. And so I was going out into the Everglades like maybe 4 or 5 times a week for almost a year and a half. So it was
Wow.
very exhausting. And then eventually I applied to my PhD program in North Carolina State University. And there I was still working in wetlands, but I was like coastal forested wetlands in along the North Carolina coast. And then there, that's where a lot of my work in methane kind of started developing, because before I was just helping like with nutrient analysis and sediment stuff and soils. But then when I got to North Carolina State, that's when all the methane stuff. I was working on ghost forests. I'm not sure if you've heard that term before, but ghost forests in North Carolina are kind of or they occur more so because of saltwater intrusion, but also a lot of more in flooding events that are happening, and so it causes this mass die-off in these freshwater forested wetland ecosystems. And so for my PhD, I was just looking at methane emissions from the standing dead trees that were left remaining in these ghost forests, but also using remote sensing to look at early warning signals of the shift from forest to marsh, using like time series analysis. And so that was the PhD program. And then after that, I did my first postdoc, or the first half of my postdoc, which is crazy, with the US Geological Survey in Lafayette, Louisiana. And there I was mostly working on coastal wetland resilience to extreme events. And I did some work with methane, but a lot of it was looking at the freeze event that happened in February of 2021. That really affected mangroves, mostly Texas, but a little bit of Louisiana, but mostly central Texas. And I did some methane work there, but I'll go into details later. But then after that, I did my second half of my postdoc with USGS in Laurel, Maryland. And there I was mostly focusing on marshes in the Chesapeake Bay area. And then then I finally started my new job as a research scientist at Stanford. So that's a very long-winded, timeline, but
So is Stanford like any different than the other places you've worked at, or like what do you notice?
Well, I will say the difference between, you mean like how, what do you mean?
Like,
Between the government job and Stanford, or between like location wise? Okay. With the SGS, there's a lot of, working with the federal government, there's so much bureaucracy and so much red tape. Like I probably wouldn't even be able to give you this podcast, or it would have to be like run by somebody else, because just they don't really want scientists openly talking to other people without getting media training, or which I do have media training, but like with like we wouldn't be able to talk about specific results or anything like that. They're just very protective of media interactions, I guess.
Okay.
But with Stanford, it's like matter of free for all. per se, but it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, it's more open.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So can you tell me about some of the exciting projects you have done or are currently doing?
Yeah, what I'm currently working on is not even really, I mean, it's kind of methane related, but one of the projects is looking at, well, I guess there's a few. I don't know. There's always a ton of things that I'm like a little bit of everything working on, but a smaller project that I'm looking at, I guess, right now is looking at Ramsar sites. Have you ever heard of
Oh, no,
Ramsar?
I haven't.
Basically, Ramsar, they basically designate wetlands that are important globally, and basically people have to apply for this program or apply for their wetland to be into this program. Like the Everglades is one of the Ramsar sites, and so I'm looking at Ramsar sites globally and how, I guess, how they're the health of the wetlands as of now, using time series analysis, using remote sensing. And so because it's just satellites, like I don't actually have to go into these sites like globally, because that would be very costly. And so instead I use time series analysis using satellite images to look at how they've been changing over time and seeing if they're still in good condition, basically. So that's one project. And then the other project is we do have, well, it's still connected to my previous job with the U.S. Geological Survey, where we were looking at two marshes, one in a saltwater site and then one in a freshwater site. They're both marshes. Yeah, I said that. And we have two eddy covariance towers. And so if you're not familiar with eddy covariance, these are these massive towers that have a bunch of instruments on them measuring a bunch of different things like temperature, humidity. We've got soil temperature, and there it's measuring water level and things like that. But the big important ones are measuring carbon dioxide and methane, and it's able to get measurements of large swaths of area, like 100 to maybe up to 1 kilometer, and it's dependent on the wind direction and speed. Like, so basically you have this tower, and then basically you have like the wind basically, and it could be measuring everything that's coming into this sensor right here, and this is the sensor. And so there's that project, and then another one that we're trying to get started on, where we're just in the planning phase right now, looking at potential coast or potential forested wetland restoration sites along the Brazos River here in Texas, to potentially be submitted for carbon credits. So there's that.
Okay. So are you working on any like interventions to reduce methane from wetlands that you're studying?
Interventions to reduce wetlands or to reduce methane emissions, you said?
Methane, yeah.
Right now, a lot, not so much exactly. I mean, I think right now there's a proposal that I'm trying to get started to figure out what plants might be better used in restoration sites that might emit less methane, because that's not very well known. And so, I mean, I'm sure you know that how methane works in wetlands, that there's a couple of different pathways where you can go through the water column, through the soil column, like when it is emitted to the atmosphere, but it can also go through plants themselves. And so plants kind of act as a conduit. Like, I kind of think of them as straws for greenhouse gases that are produced in the soil and that are emitted to the atmosphere, because it just creates an easier pathway in some ways. And so that was just another project that I was thinking of potentially proposing, but I'm still in the writing phase. So.
So for your last project that you mentioned carbon credits. So would that be like a reduction in methane or other greenhouse gases?
Yeah, we're trying to work with many different types of landowners to utilize the like a small piece of the land that is already unsuitable for whatever use that we're trying to use it for. Like if it was supposed to be used for grazing, but now it's too wet
Okay.
because of extensive flooding. And so
Mhm.
instead of just like kind of leaving the land as is or like not restoring it, we're working with them to potentially restore the land, and then hopefully through the restoration project help give the land or owners, I guess, some sort of compensation for the restoration project in itself. But it's tricky in the carbon market just because in freshwater wetlands you do have that methane aspect that could potentially offset carbon sequestration, just
Mhm.
because you have some carbon being stored obviously in the plants in the soil, but then you have some being emitted at the same time, like through like just plant respiration at different times of the day. But then you also have methane being emitted at the same time. And so, but there's different things that inhibit methane, like if there's decreases in water level, that would reduce it. And it depends on like how many plants there are, also what types of plants. There's these some plants that have like very specific cells called parenchyma cells that kind of allow for this methane to get to pass more quickly. And so plants like that wouldn't like really be ideal, but they are common in wetlands. So
Okay. So these like landowners, are they farmers or like what do they do?
some of them are farmers. I mean, I'm not super involved in reaching out to the landowners themselves. My part, this is like a really massive project. It's got like 15 people, and my part is to look at the carbon side of it
Okay.
and to get like baseline measurements, and like once the restoration project is has taken place, like how to monitor the carbon post restoration in order to submit that information to um, the carbon crediting company,
Mhm.
basically.
Okay. That makes sense. So for the project with the towers, do they like measure the methane emissions or like can you explain more about like how they work?
Yeah, so I guess with eddy covariance towers, they're pretty common in areas where you're trying to get a better assessment of carbon at the landscape scale. And when you pick a location, you want it to be very homogeneous, like very similar. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but very like same landscape across.
Okay.
Um,
Why is that?
and just because there can be a lot of variability in the measurements. And so
Okay.
because you have the one tower, the wind can come from any direction.
Mhm.
But obviously there's usually a predominant direction. And so you kind of want the sensors to face the predominant direction, but you know, wind changes so quickly. And so um, when you're measuring something with the sensor, you want to know what the landscape looks like, and hopefully it's like more of the same, because then you're going to get a bunch of different types of measurements. If that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so I mean, yeah, that's a really cool project, and that's been that tower that we have. Those two towers that we have been up, not continuously, but since 2019. But they also were up in 2011, I believe, in 2012. Yeah.
Okay.
And that project was or is trying to get a better assessment of the carbon budget in Louisiana, in coastal Louisiana. And this is just to feed models that other people are developing. So I'm not a modeler myself, but I just work with the data, the carbon side of the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as a researcher, how do you split your time between like the lab or the field?
Oh yeah, I mean, I actually don't even do that much lab work. Like I wish I had more field work. That would be great. I feel like that's the most exciting part of the job. It's really hard, but it's crazy because when I first started, when was first getting into this field, I was in the field so much, and I was like, I don't want to be out so often because it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten like, I guess high, I don't want to say higher, but like more like now I have my PhD and like now I'm working with the PI like more directly, you know. Now I go out into the field less. It's because some would say like my time is, it wouldn't be a good utilization of my time because I have so much other work to do, like writing
Okay.
papers or writing
Yeah.
proposals and things. And so instead we send out technicians to do these things, even though I would like to go. And so, yeah, unfortunately, I spent a lot of my time just in front of the computer, coding, writing, or reading.
Okay. So, how big is your lab and what does the team kind of look like?
Well, I don't have a lab myself per se. Like that's
Mhm.
why I said I work with Dr. Elliott.
Yeah.
And it's his lab at Stanford, the Wetland Ecosystem Group. And I'm not sure if you know how the hierarchy work. Well, I don't want to say hierarchy, but like how the group works. Like where there's undergrads, some that are part of the lab that help with some. Sometimes they help grad students. Then you have the grad students, masters and PhDs. Then you have postdocs, and then you have research staff like myself, and then you have the main um, professor who runs everything else.
Yeah.
And so that's more or less the dynamic.
Okay. So, what kind of backgrounds do these people come from? Because you mentioned like the modeling. Do they come from like technology backgrounds, or like, yeah, what backgrounds do people come from?
Um, for you mean within the lab,
Yeah.
or yeah, they're in the lab. There's people that are working on the social aspect of environmental work, like environmental justice,
Okay.
um, looking at like green spaces and in urban communities, urban cities, mostly around, I think, around San Francisco or the Palo Alto area, just because that's where Stanford is.
Okay.
Um, yeah, but there are a few students that are doing more global work. Like we have a student working in the Gambia, and she's
Mm.
looking to compare um, mangrove restoration work there. So that'll be, and then comparing it to satellite images at the same time. Um, what else? Yeah, I mean, everything is like wetland related, of course, but
Okay. So, you talked a little bit about the modeling stuff. Do you have like any other projects that use any technologies?
um, any other? Oh, actually, I forgot to mention this. At When I was in Lafayette, I did a project with the U.S. Geological Survey. It was kind of a small project where I got the chance to look at cypress knees. Are you familiar with cypress knees?
Um, I don't think so.
Okay, so bald cypress trees are pretty massive trees. They're pretty common in what you would think when you think of a wetland, like a swamp wetland. You're probably thinking of a bald cypress tree. And
Mhm.
then within these trees, they have these root structures called cypress knees that basically
Oh, okay.
um, stick out of the soil, and
Mhm.
they look like knees. I mean, I don't know exactly why they're called cypress knees, but they're just like these things that are just sticking out the water. And as part of this small project, I was looking at about how methane might be emitted from those cypress knees. And I looked at that for many sites, many forested wetlands across the Mississippi River. And then one other thing that I use in addition to measuring methane is I used my cell phone to scan the knees, like using LiDAR, to get a better dimension, to calculate surface area and volume, which are two things that are needed to calculate a flux, which is just like a unit of something moving from one thing to another, basically, and that's what a flux is. But I was measuring methane specifically from the knee going to the atmosphere. And so that was pretty interesting because I had never used that before. And I think only a handful of researchers at the time had used LiDAR in that way, like from that's so accessible from your phone. So we're able to publish that information. I thought that was so cool.
Okay. What did you find out from that?
Kind of what you would think that, high water levels would lead to, or just even soil saturated conditions lead to higher methane. And then I originally thought that higher knees would emit less just because the taller knees would be further away from the soil. And so, and that was kind of true, but it wasn't like as strong of a correlation as I thought. So I think there might be something else happening there.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out what.
Yeah, I think I was also thinking it might be interesting to drill. Well, this is going to sound crazy, but I wanted to drill inside the cypress knee because sometimes it could be hollow, because it could be rotting, and then that could also produce methane just because of the hollowness. Kind of creates these conditions for methane production. But then the bark of the cypress knee could also be like containing that methane. So it could be like little methane bubble, like methane like things like sticking out of the water, but are being slowly emitted through the bark. That was my theory, but I never got a chance to actually drill. So
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
But I did do that with with a few standing dead trees in North Carolina, because that was also my theory, because it could happen in standing dead trees where you have like hardwood rot, and then that could lead to methane emissions. And we did see an increase. So methane basically was higher at the base of these standing dead trees, and then it decreased as you go further up in the tree.
Oh, okay.
And so we also did for that project, we did additional samples for stable isotope analysis to kind of like trace the methane, like to see what could be happening. So with that's what stable isotopes do, because the way it works is when microbial communities favor one, they favor a lighter stable isotope, or a lighter carbon, and so that kind of throws off the stable isotope, and so you get a better idea. You're able to kind of trace what happens throughout the ecosystem. So if you measure from different points, you're like, okay, the stable isotope is changing, and then you have an idea of why it's changing. And so we measured stable isotopes from pore water, from soil, and then from inside the tree. And then from we have also attached chambers to the tree, just like to look at the gas that's being emitted immediately outside the bark. And then we took an additional sample of just the air by itself, and then you could see with the stable isotope, it was lightest in the soil, in the pore water, and then it was getting heavier as you were going up, and then it was the heaviest when it was in the air, and that's just where it means like the methane was being oxidized basically as it's going through this pathway. And by oxidized, I just mean it's being like methane is converted back to carbon dioxide, and that's just what happens when it's consumed by microbes.
Okay. Oh, that's really cool. So what are some challenges you face in doing all these projects?
Some challenges. I feel like the biggest challenge is always in the field work, because something always goes wrong. I mean, something always goes wrong, and you kind of just have to go with it. Sometimes you have to I feel like MacGyver. I don't know if you know who that is or like what that is, but it's just like kind of like have to come up with some sort of solution using whatever you have, basically. And so, yeah, I don't know. That's usually the biggest problem. It's just like something doesn't work, or like, yeah, I can't even give examples because it's just like, it's usually like like a machine not working. So I worked a lot with the portable gas analyzer, and sometimes
Okay.
that could be kind of finicky. So that was kind of annoying, but we had a backup process where if the portable gas analyzer wasn't working that well, or if it would overheat because, we're out in the middle of the summer, we would just take syringe samples of just like gas, taking out gas from these different chambers, and that would be the backup option. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in these projects, do you ever also collaborate with other universities?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in the project where I was looking at the mangrove freeze event, I mean, that was maybe like 15 different institutions, because the way that worked is when the freeze happened, um, researchers all over the Gulf of Mexico, um, sorry, when the freeze happened, researchers all over the Gulf of Mexico went out and went to the closest mangrove they could find within their research study area, and they recorded the damage and took photos, and then they followed
Okay.
this protocol that was sent out to get an assessment of the damage, and then that was later sent out. And so all that data was used by me to get ground truth data to compare to satellite data, and that's what the paper was about, is like comparing the ground data with the satellite data, and to look at temperature thresholds in mangroves, which are very temperature sensitive species. So that was a lot of institutions, a lot of people to work with. The paper was like
Yeah.
28 authors besides me, I think.
Yeah. So when you go to the field, like how many people usually go?
It depends by project. If it's something like regular work, or like routine, I guess, it's usually me and one other person. Like, you can't ever go in the field by yourself because that's really
Yeah.
dangerous. But if it's the initial part of the project, I mean, I guess it depends by project, like I said, but maybe like 4 people. I mean, I've had large groups go before. I mean, I think no more than like 5 or 6, but yeah.
Okay. And then so out of all the like research and projects that you've done, what do you think has been like the most fun part of it?
I would say the field work is always the most fun, but also the hardest, which is kind of weird because I don't get to go out in the field as much anymore. It's almost like I forget, like I have amnesia about how hard field work is. So I'm just like excited. I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to go. And then maybe like an hour in, I'm like, all right, I think I'm ready back. I'm ready to be back in the office. But it's always like, in theory, better because I'm always working at my desk. But it is fun, and I feel very fortunate because I get to work, or I've gotten the chance to work in a lot of beautiful places. I think my favorite has been the Everglades, because there's like 3 different modes of transportation. If like the site is like within, like across the road, like close to the road, we would just like walk. Um, but sometimes the water level would be high, and we wouldn't wear chest waders because we would flood. Like, you have the chance to overflood, like, because the water can go in your chest waders, and that could be more dangerous.
Yeah.
And so, but we would like carry our stuff over our head and then just get to the stations. So yeah, sometimes we would just walk. But the second mode is going by boat. And the airboat was always fun. I mean, like, I'm certified to drive airboats. Like, I would drive airboats that whole year and a half. I was driving airboats.
What's an airboat?
It's the things that you see like in Louisiana and Everglades that have like the massive fan in the back of the boat. and then
Oh,
it kind of pushes, and there's like just like a very flat bottom, and so
oh
you can
yeah.
only use the boat in still waters, basically. Like you can't take that anywhere else. It's got to be like in the Everglades or like Louisiana swamps, basically.
Okay, that's cool.
Um, yeah, it's very loud, so you have to wear earmuffs. But we also did a lot of work um, in the bays system in Everglades, and so sometimes we would take marine boats, and that was also fun to drive. But and so the last mode of transportation was by helicopter. So for those areas that were impossible to get to by boat, just because of how far they are, or about how difficult, because there's no like direct path, and so there would just be a helicopter that would pick us up and then drop us off in the middle of the Everglades, and so you get to see this beautiful view, and then get dropped off for a little bit, and then that's when you collect your samples and stuff, and then they pick you back up and then take you back. I mean, we did that a few times. Like basically the helicopters just like hopping from place to place while we collect samples, and that was the most fun and the most beautiful, I think, for sure.
That's cool. So, what advice would you have for high schoolers or people like me who want to work in a similar field?
I would say it can be kind of hard just because it's so competitive. So I would highly suggest to diversify your skill set. Um, I think for me, that's why I wanted to focus on, like, it's not just focusing on wetlands, it's just like being able to code, being able to work with remote sensing data, but also understanding the ecology, understanding the biogeochemistry. Like that's all those things are super important. Um, and then now I'm trying to learn, get more into the carbon credit stuff, because I think that would be very useful. And so for somebody younger, like I would completely suggest getting your hands into as many things as possible. Like even when I was an undergrad, I was doing research in a couple of different things because I wasn't sure what I wanted to study exactly. Like I said, I started in seagrass, but I also did like fish genetics. I was doing like fish barcoding is what we call it. Um, but I mean, I realized I didn't like genetics or any of that, like the lab work. So things like that, just like going out and trying a few different labs while you're in college, or I guess you can now as a high school student. Maybe it might be a little more difficult, but um, yeah, just experiencing a few different things, but also diversifying your skill set would be very helpful.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.